Sorry, I'm going to do a restart. I just want to welcome everyone to our webinar this evening, Intro to SwimRun with Coach Doug MacLean. We have Doug is a USAT Level 2 certified coach. He's been coaching with QT2 Systems since 2010. He was a professional triathlete for 8 years and has recently been doing a bunch of swim run racing. So I want to go ahead and take over to Doug. The webinar is being recorded today, so you'll have it available to you in the future. If you have questions, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask them at any point, or you can also put them into the chat box if you prefer. So Doug, over to you.
All right, thanks, Reem. So yeah, swim run, let's get into it. It's, I guess the first question obviously is, what is swim run? Because, you know, you're gonna see people asking frequently, you know, what is swim run? How is it different than, say, aquathlon? Aquathlon is purely swim run. It's like you swim. Aquathlon is like a triathlon without the bike. Like you swim 1,000 meters and then run a 5K or something like that. Swim run is most definitely not that. So it's, you could think of it two ways. It's either you're in like a park and you're running from pond to pond or lake to lake. So you run to a lake, swim across the lake, run to the next lake, swim across that lake, and you keep going. Or if it's in the ocean, you could think of it as island hopping, where you swim to an island, run across the island, swim to the next island, run across that island, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And it's generally made up of a lot of short legs. You know, sometimes most of the swim legs are 200 to 1,000 meters. Most of the run legs are 1 to 4 miles. That's not to say sometimes you'll see swim legs that are 50 meters long. Sometimes you'll see run legs that are just 1/4 mile long. So there is a lot of variability. And it's not like triathlon where you just have, you know, 3 swim, bike, run. You could have 20, 30 mini stages within each race. Most of them take, you know, 3 to 4 hours at the typical distance raced. Maybe a typical distance might be something like everything added up to maybe 15 miles of running and, you know, 4 to 5 kilometers of swimming. But again, because this isn't triathlon, there aren't standard distances, which is honestly a racing format I prefer. They just pick the racing format and the distances are just set by the local terrain. You know, they don't feel slaves to this. The swim has to be exactly 1,500 meters. It's nothing like that. So it's pretty fun because every race is unique and quirky in its own way. But that said, you know, races can just be as short as an hour, or the big one, kind of quote unquote Kona of swim run, is Attilo out in Sweden, and winning times in that are up, you know, 7 hours, something like that. So since none of us are going to win it, at least anytime soon, you know, if one of us were to go do Attilo, you know, we're looking at 8, 9, 10 hour day out on course. One of the real interesting quirks of swim run is that you have to carry all of your gear with you. And this makes it actually really fun, and it leads to some interesting equipment decisions. And I kind of touched on this before. Most importantly, this is not triathlon. There's a lot of crossover. You know, if you're good at triathlon, you're going to have a lot of the skills that are necessary to be good at swim run, but it's not like you can just do triathlon and then instantly jump into swim run and you're going to be amazing. Because when we get down to it, it has more in common with trail running than it does with triathlon. So we'll get into that. Continued, what is it? You can race solo at some events. Most events, the kind of the primary preferred format is as a 2-person team. And honestly, the 2-person team is way more fun than solo, because you're just out there with somebody and you got a buddy, and, you know, doing things with your friends is always more fun than doing them by yourself, right? And it also, the team aspect also adds a lot of weird, interesting strategy components that again make it fun. And as you can see, so in here I have like a photo. This is an actual thing at SwimRun, North Carolina. You literally climb up a waterfall. Like, it's wild. This is just stuff you don't see in triathlon. And this is a lot of what makes the sport so fun. Is there's like low key, but it really does exist. There's low key chance of like actual serious injury. Now, thankfully, the race organizers are not crazy. They don't want you to get injured. They just give you a little bit taste. So, you know, it makes it a little bit more exciting. So here's kind of a typical course, a typical ocean course, which is what I was referring to before. So this is the swim run up in Casco Bay, which one of us QT tours just won, Justin. He's one of my athletes. He won the short course solo at Casco Bay. And so as you can see, it really is just island hopping. You swim from island to island, run across the island, and you swim to the next one. And there's all these different legs in it. These ocean courses tend to be more swim heavy, in terms of, you know, swim being a percentage of total time spent on course. And they're going to have choppier waves and ocean currents. And so it adds in that element of variability. Okay, I brought up this because I wanted to show you a couple things. As you can see here, the photo on the right, that's just like a typical entry scene into an ocean. These two guys are clearly teammates. They just finished a run and they're starting a swim. And on the left here, you can see, you know, the long course and the short course. There's 13 legs on the long course. There's 13 run legs and 12 swim legs, so 25 total legs. Same with the short course. You know, it's just really variable, and you're never getting bored, because say you get bored of running, well, 10 minutes later you're in the ocean and dealing with that. And it's kind of really good for the short attention span folks like myself. So I kind of like that. And then flip side, with all these short legs, overheating is not really a huge issue, because as soon as you start getting hot on the run, you get relief, you get in the water. Like, that's not to say body temperature management, you can ignore it. I'm just saying it's not as big of a deal as saying something like an Ironman, where you're out running a marathon at 3 p.m. and just baking from the inside out, right? So here's a typical land course. This is the course for the North Carolina race down at Hanging Rock State Park. So as you can see, it's more like a trail run where you're just running from lake to lake. These tend to be a little bit more run heavy in terms of total volume distribution for the race. And the running can be very technical. Like, think of the most technical trail running you're doing in like a 50K ultra marathon or something like that on the trails. It's going to be like that. Like, you're scrambling on rocks. I showed you the picture, like you're going up a dang waterfall, really steep descents, lots of routes, lots of single track. I love it. It keeps you focused in the moment, and it's just interesting. It's a real fun change of pace. So this is just more on typical courses for an inland course. And this is Justin and I at North Carolina race last year, or 2 years ago, I guess it was. Nobody raced last year, right? But this is like the views you get during a swim run race. It's wild. It's so cool. And as you can see, we have our wetsuits down around our waist. We have them pulled down for when we're running. We've got our goggles around our necks. There's just all sorts of craziness going on. Justin has his paddles there. So let's get into this equipment stuff, right? Because it's kind of weird. How on earth do I dress for this? That's the number one question everyone asks. So you're swimming in your running shoes and you're running in your wetsuit, right? None of this makes sense. But it all goes back to the fact that you just gotta, whatever you want to use on course, you gotta be carrying it from the get-go, and you need to still have it with you when you finish, because they don't want you littering on course, because, you know, they care about the courses. Now, to account for this, there's a whole bunch of specialty made equipment that doesn't seem a whole lot different than triathlon equipment on the surface, but when you dig into it, it's actually, there are some very important differences. So, and then there's a couple other things, you know, safety requirements, they're not that interesting. You're gonna have to carry a whistle and a small first aid kit. Just stash them, you're not really gonna need them, but it's good to have them for safety, just in case you do. And one other equipment thing I forgot to mention, you're allowed to use paddles and a buoy on the swim. And before you scoff at that, you go try to run for a while and then swim with your running shoes on. And let me know how that goes for you. So the paddles and buoy are pretty necessary, actually. So first thing, let's get into the wetsuit. So here's just an example. There's a whole lot of brands. Like there are a few entries from Blue 70. I think Roka may make one. I know Orca makes one, but there's also some other brands that you may not be familiar with that really specialize in swim run gear. Like I have my swim run wetsuit is made by a company called Colting. I know Vig also makes some really good swim run suits. So basically, what you're going to see is they can be long sleeve or short sleeve. I just put a picture of a long sleeve here. They're all going to be front zip so that you have that easy access to pull them on and off when you're transitioning between swim and run. They're going to have pockets where you can stash your gels, your first aid kit, your whistles, all that kind of stuff. And your cup, because you're not going to, the aid stations are not going to have like disposable cups like you would see in a triathlon. What they do is they give you a little plastic collapsible cup at the beginning of the race, and you just have to carry it with you for the whole race. And in between aid stations, you stash it in one of your wetsuit pockets, and then when you want water at an aid station, you pull it out, fill it up, take a sip. No big deal. These suits are going to have very, very thin leg panels, some of them are going to be as thin as a swim skin, and that's because you really don't need buoyancy from the leg panels like you do in a regular wetsuit because you have that buoy going for you, right? So what do you need buoyancy in your thighs for from a wetsuit if you got buoyancy coming from a buoy? And those thin leg panels are very, very important for running. The first swim run race Justin and I did, we just used modified regular wetsuits because we were like, we don't know if we're going to like this. So we don't want to spend money on a specific swim run wetsuit. I can tell you, halfway into the race, our hip flexors, like we finished and it was fine, but our hip flexors were devastated from trying to run in a wetsuit with 4 or 5 millimeter thick neoprene on the thighs. It's not so good for running in a regular wetsuit. So if you're going to get into this, I really do recommend a swim run specific wetsuit. Some of them have loops on the waist, which can be helpful. If you don't have loops on the waist, you're going to want to buy a belt, which you can, and I'll get into that on one of the next slides right here. So I'm skipping ahead to a slide, but you can see here on the right, that's the type of belt you would buy. And you see the like D-rings on there. That's so you can like clip in a buoy, clip in your paddles, clip on your tether. But anyways, back to this slide. So for the buoy and shoes, you want to go big with the buoy. I use an Arc. I forget exactly what model it's called, but just you go to Arc and I guess it's the keel. No. Anyways, the flotation on this thing is so ridiculous. I can literally, if I'm like open water swimming and I just feel like taking a break, I can take it out from between my legs and sit on it like a chair in a lake. And it floats my entire upper body above the surface of the lake. And I can just sit there like I'm lounging. Like this thing is crazy. Massive flotation. And that becomes very, very helpful when you're exhausted and swimming with running shoes on. Now, as far as shoes go, I think you're going to want to go with a trail running specific shoe because the nature of these runs is highly technical. You're going to want something with some good grip on it. I prefer a thin sole to keep my foot in closer contact with the ground, get better proprioception. I think the thicker soled run shoes that some people like, if you're really into them, like the Hokas, great, wear them. They're just not for me. You can also, you see I have pictured here, you can drill small holes into the soles of your shoes if you're concerned about water drainage. That's never really been an issue for me, or it doesn't really bother me. So I haven't drilled holes into my shoes, but by all means, don't feel weird about it if you do. It's something that people do, and it doesn't really impact the integrity of their shoe. And if it makes them feel better and maybe they have a little less water sloshing around, then more power to them. That's just kind of a personal choice for you. So you have this buoy and you have your paddles and whatnot. So what do you do with it, right? What do you do with a buoy when you're running, right? You just hold it over your head, you shove it down your wetsuit? Well, not really. What you're gonna wanna do is you attach it to your waist. And as I mentioned, some wetsuits have loops on the waist. Mine doesn't. So I got one of these belts you see here on the right side of the screen. And with your paddles, you can just take a carabiner, and when you take your paddles off after you're done swimming, you can just clip them to the carabiner on your belt, or you can just honestly just shove them down the front of your wetsuit. It's no big deal. With the buoy, the way you're going to attach it to the belt is, this is one option. Basically, you're going to have to punch holes in your buoy. That's just how it is. If you want to run, here somebody, it looks like they're running shock cord through their buoy. Another tactic is to use like an old bike tube, and you turn the bike tube into like a belt, and then you just punch a hole in the middle of your buoy and you run the bike tube through the hole in your buoy. Now, the one downside to all of this is there is some friction from either the shock cord or the bike tube, and it can chew away at your buoy. So you're going to want to put some sort of reinforcement on the buoy where the shock cord is running through or where the tube is running through. Something I would recommend, I don't just randomly have pictures of plumber's tape on this slide for no reason. The pictures are there actually for a reason, because this is an example of something that could work good in terms of protecting your buoy. So you see this buoy right here. Let's imagine they had punched, instead of running the shock cord through the sides of it, let's say they wanted to run a cable or cords or a bike tube through the middle of it, right? So they would punch a hole in the middle of it, and then you've got this hole that's maybe, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch in diameter, let's say, something like that, right there in the middle. If you put it, you can imagine a cable or a tube bouncing around in there is going to chew away and kind of degrade the buoy itself. If you take something like this, it doesn't have to be plumber's tape roll, just any sort of piece of plastic with that shape, and just shove it in that hole. You can see how the flanges on it kind of hold it in place, and then that plastic inner ring acts as a protective mechanism for your buoy, and it just helps preserve your buoy and keep it longer. Because this buoy, while it's amazing, you don't get an amazing buoy for a cheap price. This thing is like, last I checked, it was like 50 euro. So we're talking 60 American for a swim buoy. So you wanna protect that thing if you can. And a mechanism, just any sort of plastic cylinder with double flanges on it is gonna be good for that purpose. And then right down here, you see just a long cable with carabiners at either end. So that's a tether. And this is an optional thing that people do when they're doing team racing, is you're allowed to actually tether yourself together in the water. And this can help keep you together in the water. And it's particularly useful if one swimmer is a lot stronger than the other, and say you're not so good at drafting with each other, you can see the cable running between them right there. And all they do is they just attach it to either the loops on their wetsuit, or, like I was talking about before, these D-rings on their belt, either way. And it just kind of emphasizes the team aspect, and it's kind of fun. I personally don't like it because I don't like having a tether cable flopping around, but there are plenty of very, very fast people who use it. So don't think it's like a crutch. It's just a personal preference thing. Fast people use them, fast people don't use them, whatever. No big deal. And so I addressed some of that back there, but these visuals, I hope, kind of give you a better sense of what I'm talking about with how you carry all of this stuff. So you can see here, they've chosen to go with hanging stuff off their waist, which is fine. And I kind of intentionally chose these because just shoving stuff down your wetsuit, well, it's easy. Showing you pictures of it is not particularly helpful. And these people are actually running with their tether, which I think is a terrible idea, but hey, whatever works for them, right? You can see they have their buoy hanging off their waist with, it looks like they went with shock cord as their choice, which is fine. And these people also went with the shock cord, except instead of hanging it off their waist, they just have it kind of tightly cinched to their thigh, so that when they get in the water, they just flip it around in between their legs and it works. My honest to goodness favorite is running a bike tube and using it as a belt. And then you just cinch the buoy up against the small of your back while you're running. And then when you want to swim, you just flip it down between your legs. But that's just my personal favorite. All these methods work. It's all personal preference. I just don't really love carrying the buoy this way all the time because it can bounce a little bit. And it's kind of annoying. It's not the end of the world, just a little bit annoying. So anyways, that was a pretty short presentation because I just really wanted to get into the basics. And right here, you can see how I kind of like to carry the buoy. See how I have it cinched up against the small of my back. And I'm putting the paddles and goggles on, and I'm about to flip it down in between my legs. And here's Justin getting really mad at me for being slow at transitions, but that's just something he's going to have to deal with, right? So anyways, that's it. That's the nuts and bolts of it. I didn't really want to get super duper technical because this really was just meant as an introduction to get you started. So with that, are there any questions?
Doug, can you talk about training for it a little bit?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So training for it is actually extremely fun. I like to think of it as say you want to get in a 2 or 3 hour session. That 2 or 3 hour session is going to go by much, much faster than any 2 to 3 hour workout you do. The best thing you can do is just go find a local pond, a local swimming hole, anywhere, get all your swim run gear on, and just go. This is what I do. This is what I have Justin do. And I don't see why you would do anything different. Find a pond with some trails next to it. Just, I'll tell Justin, okay, you have a 2.5 hour swim run session. And I want you to break that up into at least 4 swims and 4 runs, something like that. And so I don't think doing set distances is a good idea because there are no set distances on race day. It's all variable. Maybe you'll start off now. These races do typically start with a run, so I like to start the workouts with a run. Maybe start it with a 1 mile run, then you just run straight to the lake and dive straight in, and maybe you do a 1,200 meter swim, get out, and then go do a 3 mile run, and have it end up back at the lake and go do a 500 meter swim. And you don't really have to think about it beforehand. I don't think there's a ton of value in planning because, as I said before, your distances on race day are so variable. You want to just train yourself for kind of that randomness. And so when I'm working out, all I do is, like I said, I'll set that time limit, 2 hours, 3 hours, and I'll just say, okay, I'm just going to keep going back and forth. And I'm largely going to do it just based on what I'm feeling in the moment because there's no sense in trying to overthink the training. As far as interval distances or interval intensity. Because a lot of what you're doing is just getting used to not only swimming and running with all this gear on, but the physiological aspects of going back and forth. And then also your transitions. Your transitions aren't hard, but you still have to practice them. Now, one thing that's worth noting is you're gonna wanna practice, if possible, you're gonna wanna practice in very cold water, which I know sounds weird, but a lot of these races are generally not hot weather races, the way triathlon often is. This whole race format was born in Sweden, and they like to keep it that way. That's just the culture. It tends to be cold weather environments. So what I'm getting at is, first time I did this, we're running, and then all of a sudden we jump in a lake. The lake is, 58 degrees. And I was warned about this beforehand. I was like, it's not going to happen to me. But sure, lo and behold, it happened to me. Something happens when you're really hot and then you instantly get into cold water and start working hard. Something happens, I guess, with the vestibular channels in your ears. And you get out, and there's a really good chance you're going to be dizzy as hell. Like I literally, every time I got out of this lake we're looking at now, it's like, 600-700 meter swim. I had to stand up and hug a tree for a good 30 to 45 seconds before I could run. It was driving Justin crazy. He's like, Doug, what are you doing? I'm like, Justin, if I let go of this tree, I'm going to fall on my face and break my nose. And it was literally true. So the point I'm getting at there is you want to seek out those cold weather training environments so you can prep yourself and be at the very least mentally prepared for what it may feel like if you get out of the water and something screwy happened with your ears and all of a sudden you can't stand up. So there is real value in that. So, and get crummy shoes to train in because your shoes are going to get ruined. And that's just how it goes. I would recommend having a different pair of training shoes and racing shoes because you might not want to ruin your racing shoes when you're just maybe practicing on less technical trails than you'll see on race day. And that's not to say the only way to get ready for this is by doing actual swim run workouts. Like there's a lot of value in just getting in the pool and doing, you know, kind of high volume or high intensity paddle workouts. When I go to the pool and I'm trying to get ready for a swim run race, 60 or 70% of my volume for a workout is going to be with paddles on. And likewise, when you're running, you know, really work on the technical aspects of running. If you have, seek out the most technical trails you can near your house. Don't worry about doing them fast. Worry about getting comfortable on them because the runs in these races are overwhelmingly technical. One of the best guys, probably the best guy in America at the swim run racing is this guy, Marcus Barton. And as a triathlete, he's nothing special. I think he's good, but you know, he's nothing, you know, not like a national champion or something. He's not going out and winning 70.3s. He's just a good, decent age group triathlete. But if you put him on a swim run course, he is a demon. He's one of the best in the country, probably the best in the country, one of the best in the world. And that's because his technical skills at trail running are so advanced. And also just his familiarity with paddle swimming is so advanced. He's so strong, and he's very specifically dialed into this sport. So is there crossover? Yes, but they are two very different animals. And so you should treat them as such, I would say. Okay, hopefully that answered that.
Yeah, definitely. How about, do you have any favorite races?
I haven't done enough to say I truly have a favorite because unfortunately there just aren't that many races. I would guess there's fewer than 10 in America right now. I think they're going to get more and more as people see more and more how fun they are. But, you know, some of the companies you're going to want to, so there's SwimRun North Carolina, which is run by an independent company. Then there's also Odyssey SwimRun. You could look them up. They have several races throughout the country. They have one up in Maine. They have one in the Great Lakes. They have one in Texas. I feel like they have one out in California, or they did at one point. But I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. If you just go to their website, it's all on there. And then there's also a bunch of races in Europe where this sport is a bit more well established. But I don't know, you know, I've never done any of these over in Europe, so I can't tell you a whole lot about them other than the World Championship up in Sweden. And that's you know, the quote unquote Kona of swim run, as I mentioned before.
Great. Does anyone else have questions? No, it doesn't look like it. So
how do you train for the trail running?
I mean, honestly, just like you train for any other sort of trail running. I know, right? Yeah, that doesn't really answer your question. Kind of like I said, you know, you do really want to focus on getting out and just getting on technical terrain, and don't look at your heart rate, don't look at your pace, just focus on getting comfortable on single track and rocky terrain and terrain with roots with it and terrain with lots of ups and downs or slippery surfaces, because your paces and your heart rate, they're going to look like garbage compared to what you can do on the road. But that's not the point. You don't become like road speed only matters so much when you're running on technical trail terrain. You really just have to practice and practice. And I know it's a simplistic answer, but that's really what it comes down to, is you just have to get comfortable running on really kind of ugly terrain. And then beyond that, you do kind of want to focus a bit more on strength, and you want to focus a bit more on vertical. Because say like in an Ironman, a typical Ironman run course is maybe going to have 20 to 40 feet per mile of climbing. Whereas a typical swim run course or a typical trail running course, you're going to see 100, 150 feet per mile of climbing. Like we're talking increased climbing by a factor of 5 or 10 when you're looking at a swim run event versus an Ironman. So what does that mean? It means running strength and ability to absorb impact forces when you're going downhill are much more relevant in trail running and swim run than they are in Ironman. So kind of a better way to measure your run prep for an event like this, like say you're getting ready for a 70.3 on Ironman, you're kind of looking at run time and run distance. For swim run, what you really want to look at, you don't even look at horizontal distance. You want to look at run time and run vertical. Like, don't think I want to get in 40 miles of running this week. Think instead, I want to get in 7,000 feet of vertical this week. And that kind of shifts the focus and makes it more appropriate to this type of terrain. Is probably the best way to approach it. So, okay, I've beaten that into the ground, I think. Did that help?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Any more questions? I'm here all night, folks.
Sure, I'll ask another. Since you mentioned the the freezing, the colder lake temperatures and whatnot, I doing some of the swims before and coming out, like almost had hypothermia. How do you I know you can mentally practice helps, but how do you in that situation warm your body up? You just start besides getting trees.
I really if you're in the moment, there's not a whole lot you could do. I guess you could do jumping jacks to get your body moving, but then what's the point of that? Why not just run or jog to get your body moving, right? So really your best defense against that is going to be to prepare better beforehand. Some things like maybe stash a neoprene swim cap in your wetsuit, that could be helpful. Or if you don't want to go all the way with a neoprene swim cap, maybe just stash 2 swim caps so you're kind of double capping it. If you're worried about hypothermia, you could get a full sleeve wetsuit as opposed to a short sleeve. Like as you can see here in this photo, I had just hacked a regular wetsuit, so I packed it all the way down to sleeveless, and this was a terrible mistake for these lake temperatures. I think maybe if I had been like a short sleeve, maybe we're talking a different story. But yeah, if you're in the moment, there's not a whole lot you can do. So it's just more about mentally prepping yourself and then stashing extra warm swim gear before the race. Because once you're out there, that's all you have, Okay. Well, seems like that's it for questions. But obviously, if you have more questions, you could reach me. I'm at Doug, D-O-U-G, at QT2Systems.com. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks for tuning in. It was fun. You should all do swim run racing because it's super fun and it's a nice fun change of pace from Ironman, and it can maybe take you out of your comfort zone and get you to work on some skills. Maybe some of the skills you learned in swim run could then go back and kind of supplement and help fill in gaps that you may have in other formats of multisport racing. All right, so thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks, Doug.